Listeners, welcome back to this week's Tales of Abundance. We appreciate you being here, and as always, I'm here with Anthony Marino and Dr. John Oberg. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
What's shaking, Randy?
Hey. All right,
I'm
I'm
doing
excited to
great.
jump into this. We can get right in. We're going to start as always with the abundance briefing. Hopefully, give you a little shinier outlook on the world and what's happening. And the first topic is, everybody wants more money in their pocket, right? And there have been some tax changes this year that I think are going to, put a little bit more money in various people's pockets. So, some of the things, and a lot of this comes straight from the IRS, but the standard deduction has gone up. It's from 15,750 to 16,1, but still, almost $500, four or $500 there. There's also
You can tell this is Tales of Abundance, Randy, when we turn taxes into a shiny thing. Like that's a great. Like I just want to point out, like that is hopeful when you're like, hey, let's talk about taxes. We want here to talk about abundance. It's awesome. I love it.
Well, it's less taxes, right?
I love it.
Less
Yeah.
taxes. So I think the big one that got a lot of heat in the campaign was no tax on tips, right? And I think there's some provisions to that. We're not trying to be accountants here and telling you how to do this, but the no tax on tips, and then with that, I know there's also either no tax or less tax on overtime on both of those things. So that's a pretty big pay raise for a lot of Americans. And then another one, you can now write off car loan interest similar as you can your mortgage if the car was assembled or final assembly was in the U.S. and up to $10,000 a year in interest. So that should help car sales. The child tax credit went up from $2,000 to $2,200, and then one of the other big ones is businesses can now hurry up their depreciation of assets. So if they buy a new machine or a new bulldozer or a new whatever, instead of having to depreciate that over many years, they can depreciate it up front, which should create more investment and more advancement. So, gentlemen, what are your thoughts on all this?
I mean, for me, it's just good things to talk to your CPA about. I mean, I think when you read about people who are building wealth in their lives, one of the things they talk about a lot is tax management, and so making sure that you're paying the appropriate taxes that you pay, but paying the appropriate taxes that you pay. And so I think these are great questions to talk to your CPA about for sure. And other strategies too. Like everyone's gonna have a different situation, but talking to your CPA about like how do I manage my taxes appropriately. And in my world, I tell my CPA like there's the legal, there's the illegal, and there's the gray area. And so I just stay out of the gray area entirely. I want to be only in the I sleep well at night zone. But when regulations change, I want to be aware of how they impact me.
Yeah,
You don't want to give extra money to the IRS for nothing.
well, I think it's a little bit more than just talking to your CPA. I think it's got to affect your decisions. For example, we kind of think that deduction for depreciation is a big business thing. It actually really benefits small businesses, even in an acquisition. In 2016, there was something very similar put on the books. And actually, it's exactly the same. And when we acquired a company, we were able to write off 100% of the acquisition cost against personal income. And so in that year, we saved a significant amount of capital by doing that. So if you're thinking about buying a business, factor that into the equation in terms of the net cost to you. Some of people typically are buying businesses that are coming off of either another business or an employment environment, and there could be a tremendous gain. Of course, you got to talk to pros about it and how to structure things, and that goes with everything that we're talking about. Decision making around economics, it got a little more complicated, and it looks like it got a little better for everybody.
All right, love it. Our second topic is aligned, and it's that, I don't know if you guys saw this article, is in multiple places last week, but Trump ordered the Fed to start buying mortgages again, or mortgage-backed securities. $200 billion he's ordered them to start buying. And I think this is a really big, I think this is actually bigger than the tax thing. It's just, but I also think most people don't understand what it means, right? I think this is just,
When you're talking about adding liquidity into the market, right?
yeah, right. I
Yeah,
mean,
and so
the
that means
Fed
more
increasing
cash
their balance.
available.
What's that?
Yeah, and that's going to make it easier for people to have access to liquidity, right?
Well, actually, it's a
Well,
little bit different than that. It's not so the act of the government buying its own bonds will increase the demand for those bonds temporarily, which will drive the yield down on those bonds, which makes it, which directly affects mortgage rates. So if the average mortgage rate is 6.5% right now, and the cost of funds, the bond yield is 4.5%. By buying $200 million worth of bonds, the yield will drop to say 4%, and mortgage rates can drop correspondingly. However, it's temporary. If the market will react to that today, but if they don't see it as a long-term buying, then there'll be a spring back to the old mortgage
Yeah.
rates. So
But that means that there may be a period coming up where if you wanted to buy a house or refinance with a lower interest rate, you may have that opportunity. So, but those things usually happen sometimes quickly in terms of, weeks and months. So if now is the time to consider, like, if that were to happen, would I want to buy or refinance a house? Do I have a relationship with a mortgage broker? Should I be talking? Like, it's because, for at least for me in earlier in my life, I wasn't paying attention to these things. I didn't kind of see them coming. And so I wasn't ready to take advantage of those opportunities when they showed up. And so I think this is our call out to the listener, like, hey, if these are things that are on your radar, if you want to sell a house, it's easier to sell a house for a higher price with lower interest rates. It's easier to buy a house with lower interest rates. And so being ready for those things can be helpful.
you make a great
for
point,
me,
but
I bought a house 2 years ago, and I think I got somewhat skill, mostly luck, to kind of really time the bottom of the price well. But the cost for that is I have a 6.75% interest rate. I would love if interest rates would drop. I mean, I bought knowing that at some point the government was going to start buying mortgages again. I mean, this is what they did leading up to 2008, by the way, is they loaded up the Fed's balance sheet, and that's how they got mortgage rates. If you remember when people were getting 2.5, 2.75, that was only possible because the Fed was buying them and creating it. So, we've said this before, but in the last 18 months or whatever it's been, the Fed has dropped interest rates 150 basis points, so 1.5%, but mortgage rates have barely moved because they don't actually impact them. But to Anthony's point, the demand does, right? And
That's right.
And so if the Fed is buying them and they're bidding lower, it will force the price down. I don't know how much. And I also think Anthony's right when he says it could be temporary, but I would be beyond shocked if it was temporary. I mean, every time they print or do something like this, it's bigger than the previous time. If you look, there's no instances of the government doing bailouts or printing where it's smaller than it was last time.
yeah. So watch out.
So be ready.
Yeah, be ready for the opportunity to grab a mortgage, but also be prepared to live with higher inflation, higher housing costs, too much money in the depreciation of the dollar, and so on and so forth. And that's really what drives longer term bonds up, is people's view of the value of the dollar. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's move to the next thing. I think this one's probably more exciting to me than you guys, but NASA has announced that they are launching, and they've already, I think, moved it, closer to the launch pad, whatever. I mean, I don't have the exact date, but this is imminent. Artemis 2 is going to be launched by NASA, and we're going back to the moon. And I mean, I think it's a few weeks. Somebody better fact check me on the timing, but we're going back to the moon for the first time since 72, 73, somewhere around there. Now it's going to be 4 astronauts. They're just going to go to the moon, circle the moon, and come back, similar to, I think, a couple of the early Apollo missions did that. I don't know to me, this is exciting. I think this is, the Star Trek future that I dream of a little bit. What are your guys' thoughts here?
I'm a little lost on what's the point. And I know that we develop tremendous wealth of technologies that we use today because of what we did traveling to the moon and back. I don't quite understand what the point of it is. So I'd love to at some point be brought up to speed on the why. And also, I worry, frankly, about our capability to do it. NASA's demonstrated that it can't keep up with private enterprise in space, but they're going to take this one on. Would we be better off with Jeff or Elon doing this for us? I don't know. It's an open-ended question.
To your point on the cost, this launch is expected to cost $4.1 billion is what NASA is spending. Elon or SpaceX can launch a Falcon 9 for under 70 million, and even the brand new great big Starship they can launch for somewhere between 10 and 100 million dollars. So over 4 billion to worst case 100 billion for a SpaceX launch. So yeah, there's some efficiency problems, but I still think it's cool we're going back to the moon. And for me, the purpose is this is just another way for us to advance technology, advance abundance. We've talked recently about, energy and space and solar arrays and data centers. The moon is another place for that. And it's also just from a mining, it's full of minerals and things that we need, as part of building out this electricity and robotics. We need more stuff. So it's a little bit of a land grab as well to get access to a whole bunch of resources that we can mine there, in a lot of cases, much more easily than we can mine them on Earth.
Yeah.
Now, getting them back and, I'm sure there's a huge cost to that, et cetera. But, John, what do you think?
I think it's just fun. I mean, for me, it's like we went to the moon for the first time before I was born, and so looking backwards, it seems at least like a golden age. And so I think it'd be cool for us to have another set of challenges, right? Excuse me, a new frontier, right? I mean, we've been there before, and space is obviously a place we're going all the time. But I think bringing that back into the kind of conversation for the news would be a really, uplifting and fun thing. And it's, I'm excited about it.
All right, let's move on to CES of 2026. And the big thing that we heard out of there was just lots of robots. Humanoid robots, robots that have 4 arms, or, there were all kinds of different forms of robots. So, John, I know this one's near and dear to your heart. Why don't you start us off here?
I saw one. I got this video I watched where the robot was like folding clothes, and it was super cool. It was really not doing a very good job, but the fact that it got folded clothes out of a laundry bin and onto a folding table and folded them and stacked them, and if it's doing that today, that it's only going to accelerate over time. And I think at some point in the very near future, we're going to have a robot that can not only fold your clothes, but hopefully launder all of your clothes. And this one's, and this is going to sound a little bit first world, but I don't like doing laundry, and so I've outsourced laundry in my life for almost 2 decades. I don't like doing laundry, and so this is cool to me. It's like, how do you automate this in a way that has more of a one-time cost instead of an every week cost to it? So I'm pretty bullish on this one.
All right. Anthony, what do you think? You want a robot in your house?
No, I don't. I don't. I've said it once. I've said it once or 1,000 times. I think it's cute, and there'll be people that'll buy them, and some number will have them, and they'll be like my son's Roomba that's in his house that is sitting in a corner, and it doesn't really work that well, and it's just a cool thing to have. But I do think that the fact that we can do what these things can do is going to advance a lot of other parts of our life in terms of autonomous driving, manufacturing, space, going into dangerous areas, going into firefight to take bombs out of fields in all these places that have been war torn over the years. So I think the technology that they're developing to fold clothes is going to lead to tremendous advances elsewhere in our lives. And I'm excited about that part, not about folding laundry or emptying my dishwasher.
John's gonna hit. Go ahead, John.
I just want to know if Anthony's free to come do my dishes then. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Hey, I'll do your dishes for $20,000. Pay me $20,000 up front, and I'll come and do your dishes, for some period of time until you have to perform
Yeah.
maintenance on me.
and then buy a new robot in a few years. That's great. What's your breakage rate?
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
John's gonna have it folding laundry. I'm gonna have it cleaning toilets. I don't know, vacuuming the floor, mowing the lawn.
okay.
I mean, there's just a lot of things I would love to have it doing. So, all right, we can agree to disagree on this
I'm not
one. I love it.
disagreeing. Like I said, I think the technology, what they're doing with technology and the chips and the movements and the ability they figured out the hand movement. That was the biggest issue that they had. The hand movement and the movement of the elbow. They never could master that. And they seem to be either have already done it or on the precipice of it. And that just opens up so much opportunity for people that are a lot smarter than these three guys to employ this technology in other parts of our lives and other parts of our industry. So I'm excited about it. I am, but like I said,
I think I'm going to go back and watch the Jetsons and see how far off we are. I haven't seen a Jetsons episode in 40 years. I think I'm going to go check one out.
Well, we're not that far off. There was Rosie the maid.
yeah. And
Yeah, we'll see.
fun fact on that.
I want to know the over/under on when Anthony has a robot in his house.
Yeah. Fun fact on the Jeffersons, that only ran for one season.
Jetsons? The Jetsons only ran one season. Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So,
All right.
so you could
And then it reran for years and years and years.
and years, yeah. So, all right.
All right, listeners, that wraps up the Abundance Briefing. We will be back after the break, and we're going to talk about, we're talking about this abundant future. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about what happens if life is really, really great in 20 years for each one of us, for a society as a whole. What happened in those 20 years? What does that look like, to give us a little bit of a roadmap? So we'll talk to you shortly after the break. Hey, it's Randy from Tales of Abundance. Is starting a business part of your journey? Do you have ambition but no clear path? Maybe you feel trapped in your current career. Do you want a real business that can produce $250,000 or more income for you and your family? We have an opportunity for a profitable business that can be part of your path to abundance. I want to personally invite you to see the proven system we've built. It's designed to give you that freedom and control you've been searching for. Visit premiumcabinets.com/abundance to learn more. That's premiumcabinets.com/abundance. All right, listeners, we are back from the break. John, you did some fact checking on the Jetsons during the break?
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to check it out. So season 1, 16 episodes. Season 2, 43 episodes in season 2, and 10 episodes in season 3. So,
right.
the last episode, season 3, episode 10, was Georgia's boss, Space Fleet for a Day. So I'm going to go back and check a couple of them out and see what happens here.
What year was that, out of curiosity?
I'm trying to look. It looks like 1962 was season 1.
Wow. I think,
Yeah.
if you would in 62, if you would have told people it was going to take to 2026 to get most of this stuff, or 2027, 2028, I think they'd probably have been shocked. Right?
Yeah.
I think we thought it was coming faster. So, all right, let's get into our main topic. And I'm excited about this one. 20 years from now, and I'm asking John and Anthony, but if you're a listener, I'm asking you as well. 20 years from now, life is great. What happened? What did the last 20 years look like? What has to be true for that to happen? What were the steps along the way? And what does that look like? So, who wants to start? John?
I mean, I think you both know this, but every year, at least once a year, I sit down and I've been writing kind of this 10-year narrative, and I got the exercise from a book called, I think it came from Think and Grow Rich, and it's this narrative about what your life will be like in 10 years. And I use the same 5Fs framework that we talk about regularly here. So I write one paragraph about my fitness, mind, body, and spirit, and then I write one paragraph about my family, and then I write one paragraph about my friends and community. Then I write one paragraph about my fun and one paragraph about my financial and professional life. And then I have like a wrap up at the very end. There's generally one page. And then every year I update that. And it gives me a chance to try things on and see if I like the direction of my life. So the goal is not to like set up like, here's exactly where I'm going to be in 10 years, even though that's the voice that it's written in. It allows me to try on some of the things like, do I want to be doing this in 10 or 20 years? I write it for 10 years out. And so, and then it tells me like, okay, if those are the things I want to be doing in 10 years, what has to be true today? Like one of the reasons I went back to get a doctorate later in life was because there were enough doors that I wanted to open 10 years from now at that point that I thought that a doctorate would push me along that path in a way that made lots of sense. And so that 10-year thing isn't about setting a goal and making sure I get exactly there. It's more about like choosing a direction and then meditating on it to see if that makes sense for me to open those doors and to start to move in that direction. And then if I start to move in that direction for, 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or a year, and something goes incredibly well, I can double down. If it is not going that well, I can change directions. And there have been lots of times I've taken things out of that narrative because they just didn't seem to fit anymore. So, and I can talk about what those things are more specifically, but I talk about the relationships I want to have with my kids and my wife, and I talk about the places I want to have traveled and
So
my health.
be specific, John. 10 years from now, what does that look like? What
Let
happened?
me just
What happened?
I'll walk you through some of those things right now. Like so, if I'm summarizing that document, I talk about how often I want to be reading the Bible every day. My life is very faith forward for me personally. How often I go to mass. It talks about that I want to weigh 174 pounds and I have a body fat of 17% plus or minus 1%. It talks about the level of active daily workouts 3 times a week, that I want to go walking with Amber every night after dinner for the most part. That it talks about that I get 8 hours of sleep regularly, which is unusual for me 5 years ago. And talks about what I want to be reading. And then it talks about in my marriage, things that Amber and I enjoy doing together and how we stay connected. And then I have a sentence on how I want to stay connected with my kids. They'll all be adults at that point. So I have one sentence on kind of how I want to embrace and invest in my kids without controlling the outcomes for them. Then I talk about my friends and how I want to have friendships and I want to nurture those friendships. And then I talk about some of my professional goals, both the professional goals themselves and the financial goals, and then how I want to impact the world more broadly. Like what are some of the good things I want to have impact on in my life that I would hope would be talked about in my eulogy. And so that's my, the breakdown of what I want it to look like.
Okay. Anthony? By the way, John, a couple things in there that I think are really interesting. So you said 10 years. The question was 20. You said 10. I think that's fine. If you can only see a month from now, then you could ask the same question, like,
Sure.
Where do I see it a month from now? So the time frame is less important than I think where you see it going. Anthony, what do you got here?
So, when you broached the topic, I thought about it in a macro way and a micro way. So, I'm older than you guys, so in 20 years, I'll be in a very different place than where you guys will be. But, at the micro level, it's all about, health and longevity and being able to, have a quality of life physically and mentally. So the things that I'm going to do today and embed in my behaviors, hopefully will lead to a place where during this 20-year period, I'm going to be active. I'm going to be able to swing a golf club. I'm going to know who I am. I'm going to be, in a mind, body, and spirit place where people will want to be around me and talk to me. My kids will still enjoy my company, my grandkids, and so on and so forth. So it's really all about, health and vitality and feeling good each and every day. But to do that, there's a tremendous amount of work and a lot that you can't do to yourself physically and mentally. And it's as we've spoken about in the past, it's changing, and there's a lot of different discussion about what's coming next from a biological perspective in the industry, supplements and peptides and all kinds of things that I'm going to have to evaluate over the next 20 years to, have a really good quality of physical and mental life. At the macro level, and obviously during that 20-year period, I hope my kids are going to do well, and my grandkids, and have, great grandkids and all that. So that's all obvious, and would create a happy environment for them. On the macro level, it's a little more uncertain. What would have to happen is that we would have to have a lot settled down. If you think of what's going on right now, I mean, the churn of the universe around us, both on our shores and off our shores, is actually pretty damn frightening to me. The uncertainty, the aggressiveness, the anger. This sure isn't the summer of love, that's for sure, that I remember from the late 60s and so forth. But I'm really concerned. So, what would have to change is that there'd have to be a settling down. People starting to accept other people and societies and religions and philosophies and so forth. And I just think that's, I had a boss who used to say, it's nice to have hope, but false hope is bullshit. And frankly, for 2,000 years, we haven't been able to settle down. So I'm not very optimistic about it. But that
more like 20,000 years.
Yeah,
but yeah,
whatever, the recorded history,
Anthony,
is what I'm talking about.
The stuff. I mean, the thing you talked about like health and wellness in 20 years, right? Like this is one of the things I've just been kind of brought. One of the things that's been brought to me in the last year. Peter Attia has this idea of the Centenarian Decathlon. And so, Randy, before we get too far and don't hear your answers, I want to hear your answers on 10 or 20 years too. But I do want to put a pin in the Centenarian Decathlon and come back to that after your answer, because I think it's a really interesting concept. It's new to me, not new to everybody.
Do it now.
And I want to talk.
I can wait.
This idea of like, there's health span and lifespan,
Yeah.
right? So your lifespan is how long you live, but your health span is how long you live in a healthy
Right.
way.
Right.
And I don't want to have 20 years of living where it's a miserable existence of living. I want to live as healthy as I can, and then at the end of my life have a very steep decline, not a gradual. If I could choose the way that I go out, like I would hope that I have a speedy demise so that I can have the maximum health span for my life. And one of the things that Peter Attia talks about is like, what are the 10 physical things that you want to be able to do in the last 10 years of your life, and then how do you get ready for it now? And so, like, if you want to be, I was in the Alps years ago, 10 years ago, and I was walking through the Alps with some friends of mine. So I would have been, early 40s at the time, and I mean, it seemed like I was being lapped around a 100-mile loop by these 90-year-olds. I mean, they were practically running circles around me for fun, and I just thought, what a great fitness level they have. And so if hiking in the Alps was one of my things for the last 10 years of life, that would require me to be doing a certain level of activity today. And perhaps I want to be able to lift suitcases above my head into the overhead bin when I'm 90 years old so I can keep traveling. I don't think it matters what your 10 things are. I think knowing what 5 or 10 things you want to be physically able to do in the last 10 years of your life, and then backing it into what things you can do today to make that real, seems like a really thoughtful, helpful exercise for probably most people.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. So my list, I know, shocking, I thought about it a little different than you guys did. But, I really tried to kind of get down to first principles. And so for me, a lot of that starts with sovereignty. That, sovereignty for me, sovereignty for the world, that there's, more freedom, more opportunity to pursue what they want, and being sovereign. And some of that means that we've won this thought battle with governments, and a lot, there's to Anthony's point, there's some pretty scary stuff happening around the world. And, I keep going to the UK, they've jailed over 12,000 people this year for social media posts, right? Way more than Russia and other places. So, I think we've won that battle, but we've also got the robots, the AI, and the robots are producing clean, healthy food that drones can deliver to people. So it's sovereignty and it's abundance, and not just resources, right? That's resource abundance for me, my family, the world, but it's also abundance of fun and abundance of health that you just talked about, John. One of the things that I wrote down was that I'm healthier in 20 years than I am today, right? And that means that either A, I have exercised, dieted, followed the right protocol, and or new technology has allowed that to be true, right? I put that I'm more excited or motivated in 20 years than I am today. And, the Dan Sullivan quote I love there is that, for that to happen, your future has to be brighter than your past. And in that time, I would hope that Julie and I have spent I don't have an exact amount, but I would love to start going and spend 6 weeks in Italy and just stay at 3 different villas for 2 weeks at a time and work from there, and then do the same thing in Thailand and Australia, and just go live in different places for 2-week to 3-month sprints from time to time, and have all of that happening. So that's a lot of mine are in there. Let's get a little more granular. First thing, John, a little bit of a tangent, which I love. You were very specific in 17% body fat plus or minus 1%. Off topic, but why 17%? Why not 15? Why not 21? Why not 8?
Yeah.
Why not 10?
I used to, what I put down years ago was, I obviously I played sports growing up and I was in really great shape. And so I have a picture of me that on my vision board. Let's see if I can get that up for you guys to show. And this picture of me is in my freshman year of college. And I've had, an experience where someone said to me, let's see here if I can get this up for you. So here's my vision board, and all these things mean something to me. And so if you look here, let's see, right here is a picture of me in college. And I showed this to my wife, and she was like, "You were hot." I was like, "Was?" like, what do you mean was? And so it's like, now I was way less than 17% body fat at that point, but I wanted to make sure that I looked good with my shirt off, right? And so as I've kind of done the research, that's a target for me that's measurable. And it just measurable for me makes it more real because I can say, okay, I'm moving closer to or further away from that versus look good with my shirt off. And so do I really care about 17% plus or minus 1%? No. That's just the flag that I plant in the ground so I can move toward that and try it on and see if that fits for me. I'm about 22% body fat right now. So, and I think I look okay. But that it gives me something directional to say, yes, that feels right, or no, it doesn't feel right. And
All
so
right.
that's why I pick it. That's why I pick something, is to figure out, like, I'm trying it on, right?
All right. I'm disappointed in the answer. Not because it's wrong, just because I expected Dr. John to have, well, according to this study out of that's what I was kind of expecting, and so, but anyway,
Yeah, I think
it's a good answer.
I think sometimes that type of answer can be overwhelming for people, myself included. And I think there are people that like data even a lot more than I do, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes we just need to plant the flag somewhere and try it on and then move direction. Like for me, the goal itself is less important than being deliberate. Like I just want to have agency over my life, and I want to be able to have the things that I'm choosing to have, and those things can change. Like I don't think you get to choose the direction for your life, for the next 60 years, and then that's the only thing. But I do think being deliberate and trying it on. What this forces me to do is go back and go, is that something I really want? Remember we talked about Spanish a little while ago?
Mm-hmm.
I'm visiting South America later this year, and so one of the goals I set with Amber was to be, somewhat conversational Spanish. So every day this year, we've practiced Spanish using an app on our phone, and we're practicing together. And I'm terrible. Like out of 100 and some levels of Spanish, I'm at level 8, like not good, but we're doing it. And we joked about, like, if you're serious about it, you just got to do it. And so for 5 to 20 minutes a day, I'm practicing my Spanish.
All right. So if you do that every day for the next 20 years, you will be at level 100 in 20 years. There you
Maybe,
go.
yeah.
Hopefully sooner, by the way. I want to get a little more granular with you. Let's just go back to the 17% body fat number.
Yeah.
If that's true, in 20 years you have 17% body fat, what happened? What did you do well? Might be a better way of asking the question.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I have a bucket list that ties into this. So my bucket list matches and aligns to that. And so there's really, I've got to make sure that I look at my diet and my exercise, right? And so what am I eating or not eating? And then how am I moving or not moving? And so for food, I look at like what type of food am I eating when the food is not important to me, just like day to day. And then I don't want to give myself something so difficult that I can't go and enjoy my favorite dessert from time to time or my favorite steak from time to time. But I don't want to be careless about eating all the time. I want to be deliberate about when I'm splurging and when I'm not splurging. And then like with exercise, I've got to take care of my aerobic health. You know, I've got athletic onset asthma that gets exacerbated with, you know, some allergies. And so I've got to work through my allergy stuff. And, you know, my mom passed away as a side effect of COPD. Like that was one of her big problems. And so I want to make sure I'm doing what I need to do to be really healthy metabolically and then to make sure that my pulmonary health is really, really strong. And so now that I've got like my base health kind of going in the right direction, this year I got to go work on like, hey, what does it mean to work on wellness on the pulmonary side? So that's next on my list.
Okay. Anthony, if you hit your 20-year plan or goals or what this really great perfect life, similar to that, what was true? Like what are you doing this year, next year, 5 years from now to make that happen?
Well, you know, they're educating yourself intensely on deciding what things you should be doing and should not be doing, and taking advantage of the advances in medicine that, you know, are very likely to come in the next 20 years. You know, some of it, you know, based on what AI is going to be able to do in medicine, but also, you know, in the research and the studies that are being done at a much more intensive clip. You know, we've just literally flipped the pyramid in the last 48 hours or 72 hours, the food pyramid. If this were 1971 and we were saying in 20 years, John would have a 17% body fat goal, but the information that was being provided would have made that impossible, right? It wouldn't have happened. You know, the advice and counsel he would have been getting during that time, which it would have led to, you know, where we are today. He says he has 22. I think it's closer to 27, but whatever. And he also said he looks okay. I don't know. You know, we can debate that on another podcast. But
well, to be clear, Anthony, you've not seen me with my shirt off, and I don't plan for that
thank you
to
very
happen
much. I
anytime
really
soon.
appreciate that. Thank you. That's an early birthday present. But so taking advantage of the advances that are coming. The information that the amount of information that we're going to have available to us is going to be really, really helpful, and it's also going to be really confusing. Some things that we thought were going to be here by now aren't here, but clearly we have people working on organ development, literally creating organs in the laboratory. They figured out how to create diamonds. Now they're going to figure out how to create a liver and a lung, and what they've done so far in terms of joint replacement is just unbelievable. Can you imagine the advances that we're going to have in that field over the next 20 years? So the likelihood of living a quality life is improving every single day. So that's what I see, and I think mentally, it's really important to stay engaged and stay focused on these things so that you can take advantage of advances in medicine and advances in lifestyle. You talked about visiting cities there's been a whole discussion about transportation, air travel becoming much less expensive and faster. Well, how great is that? That you'd be able to jet on over to, some corner of Italy and get there in a couple of hours and be able to, with the advances in the way you can acquire domiciles, you can rent homes for months at a time now, weeks at a time. 25 years ago, you couldn't do that. There was no VRBO or Airbnb or any such thing. So what's that going to look like during the next 20 years? So I'm excited about that side of things, but as I said earlier, I'm worried about the macro stuff that we don't have a lot of control over.
Yeah, the more I think about this, John's 10 years and I asked the question 20, it really is almost impossible to answer it with as fast as technology is going right now. I love this stuff and I just absorb it all the time in various ways. And I just had a feeling last week, like there was so much information. Like we could have picked 50 things to put in the abundance briefing today. Like even me was a little overwhelmed taking it all in. I was like, holy crap, like staying ahead of this. So, getting 5 years in the future might be a better, more realistic question at this point. It might be really hard to predict 20 years from now or even
Yeah, I think,
plan.
but Randy, I think that's exactly the thing that I'm trying to help people get out their mindset out of is like, I think you've got to realize that it's going to change no matter what, whether we slow down or speed up the pace of innovation. History would say we're probably going to keep speeding up. But to me, the 10 or 20 year goal isn't about getting it right. It's about being deliberate and seeing what doors you want to open for yourself, and then opening the first door and see if it's still a set of doors you want to open for yourself, and then being deliberate about any doors you might want to close for yourself. And so, one example of that is that I used to spend some time driving cars on racetracks, and I don't do that as much anymore. Occasionally, sure, but it's not a full-time hobby. And there are reasons in my life that became not a full-time hobby that I wouldn't press on to anybody else, but it became less important to me for reasons. And then golf is becoming more important to me for reasons. And it doesn't really matter which direction someone's going. There's going to be someone in this listener that likes driving cars and like, you're an idiot, whatever. The point is like to see which doors I want to open and which doors I'm willing to close. And so I would just encourage anybody who's like overwhelmed by the next 20 years not to let them be worried about that. Like if that's the gating item, then be as ridiculous as you want to be, but still plant the flag somewhere so that you're trying things, opening doors, moving, learning, grow. Like, I just think that's important for, your physical health and your cognitive health and your emotional health. All three things very, very important: mind, body, and spirit. And then I think you want to push all those things. If you're not exercising in those ways, I think that you could suffer atrophy. So the overwhelm, I would say, if you're feeling overwhelmed, just talk about what you think you might want it to be and don't worry about getting it right or wrong.
Yeah, I think you're making a great.
For me, I've become less of I used to write these big, long, extensive business plans, and now I'm more about what do I need to accomplish this week and today. Like your phrase for that is shortening the field, right? And sometimes you're talking about shortening it to the next 30 seconds or 5 minutes. But I have really in the last year adapted much more short-term goals and bursts. My point was that we're just the amount of advancements. We cover a few of them here. If you try to take them all in, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. It's just it's a lot right now.
Yeah, I think you've got to also in the same vein, but maybe from a different angle, look at where you are right now in terms of using the term "am I happy?" You can define that a million different ways, but what are the things that are in fact going on in your life right now that you don't want going on in your life in 20 minutes, 20 hours, 20 days, 20 years, right? And work really hard at like shedding those things. I think where we have most people have so much going on in their life, just getting through the day, working, the number of hours that they have to put in at the office or on the job site or whatever, and they don't take the time to look around and say, I got to stop hanging around with that crowd. All right, I got to stop eating what I'm eating. No more fat. I got to maybe fast food twice a week instead of 5 times a week. Really work hard at shedding that, so that you're create a different platform from which you can move on to the next stage in your day, in your week, your month, and your year. Because if you don't, what's the sense in setting a 17% body fat for 20 years if you're not going to change something that's impeding that today? And that's hard to do a self-assessment. It sounds easy, but when you self-assess, most of the time you're going to see some things you don't like, or some people you don't like, or some things you don't like, and they may or may not be easy or hard to shed. So self-reflection, hard to do. I think it's absolutely necessary.
Well, I think to that point, Anthony, sometimes sometimes you see something you really don't like. And so one of my experiences in the past was like radical action. And for me, that radical action, sometimes I overcorrected. And so now the guidance I give my kids and when I talk to my clients about this, it's like no massive movements. If you notice something big you don't like make small movements to see if that is in fact the right movement to make. And so even if it's a radical problem, unless it's a radical problem like health related cancer like that, then I might feel differently. But but I think even big problems, small steps.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right, gentlemen, let's put a bow on this thing. Any last comments, thoughts?
I think it was a great exercise. It really was, and it gave me a lot of room to think about what's going to be important in 20 years. But it made me self-reflect on, the journey itself. What's going to be involved in the journey itself, and made me think of, a few other health things. I started doing some additional research based on something I heard from someone that I trust in terms of something that they're doing for their longevity and my diet and so on and so forth. So it really, again, you've got to take the action. You've got to set the plan, and you've got to actually make the changes. Or not make the changes. Maybe you're perfect. Maybe you're that perfect human being that you're doing everything right and nothing has to change.
You always talk about Randy that way.
I know.
So, I think the thing we didn't talk about today, we can come back to another episode, is the importance of community and work or learning in this process. And so, one of the things the three of us will do offline with a group that we're a part of is we'll share this type of information with people as a thought exercise so that we get to know each other better and we support each other through the process, through what we do want to do, and then through the changes of it. And so that's something the listener may not see, is that we've done a really good job of setting up community where even though we're not all perfectly aligned and doing the same things, we support each other through that walk. And so over the next month or so, we'll share with each other some of these things more deeply. And so I think community and doing the work, like working out in the gym, working out emotionally, working out spiritually, those things are really important so you don't atrophy in those areas too.
All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up on this. So the other night when Anthony was leaving dinner, our other mutual friend was talking about going skiing, and Anthony goes, "Oh, man, I miss skiing. I'd like to go skiing again." Or he goes, "Do you think I'm too old to go skiing?" And my answer was, "You're not too old to go skiing. You're just too old to fall." And I'm bringing that up here because I think that maybe that's one of the things in 20 years with new technology is people can start doing things like that again, right? You can go skiing and not worry about falling and breaking a hip or whatever it is. So anyway, I always find these questions to be greatly beneficial for myself. It helps get me focused, grounded, making sure I'm on the right path. Any type of, again, a lot of quality of life, I think, comes back to the quality of our questions. So listeners, thank you so much as always, for listening. Tell your friends, download, all that stuff. You're still here at the end, so obviously you like us. Make sure you give us that like button. And gentlemen, I will talk to you next week.
Great. Have
Thanks,
a great
Randy.
week.
Good stuff.
All right. Bye. Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, Or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.